I saw it during dinner. My phone buzzed with a dozen pings at once. Texts, Slack mentions, 2 missed calls from Janine in accounting, and one from Craig in risk that just said, WTF, are you okay? I thought maybe someone had died. Maybe there was a breach. Maybe a vendor blew something up and my name got pulled in. What I didn't expect, what I never could have expected, was opening my inbox and seeing my own face staring back at me like a mugshot from an HR gulag. Subject line, Policy Enforcement Notice. Body. This individual has been terminated for repeated early departure. Effective immediately. Do not rehire. Underneath it, my badge photo. Cropped tight, dead eyes, it looked like a damn wanted poster. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. My husband asked what happened. I didn't answer. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, opened my laptop. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe this wasn't real. Maybe they sent it to the wrong list. But no, the email had gone to everyone. The full company distro, leadership, clients on CC, even the vendor liaisons. A few had already replied with things like noted or understood, like I was a virus being quarantined. By the way, before we go deeper, 97% of you listen to stories like this without subscribing. If you've made it this far, it means something in here hit a nerve. A like or a follow really motivates the team that helps bring these stories to life. And trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. Anyway, back to the pit. No prior meeting, no disciplinary notice, no performance flag, just a public shaming surgically executed at 7:03 p.m., right when everyone would be checking their inboxes after dinner. The only early departure was that day. 2 minutes, according to the lobby clock. And if that was a crime, then I guess punctuality is now a felony. Never mind that I'd worked through lunch. Never mind that I'd flagged 2 critical vendor issues in the morning that legal had ignored. I wasn't the problem. I was just the scapegoat, the clickbait for their tough on compliance campaign. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just logged out, unplugged the router, and turned off every screen in the house. But I didn't delete anything. Not the risk logs, not the access trails, not the audit folder with 15 years of clean reports tied to my login, and definitely not the encrypted archive in my cloud vault. That one had been building since 2014. What they didn't know, what no one in that smug little HR death squad realized, was that I wasn't just another paper pusher with a clipboard. My name wasn't just on vendor memos and internal Slack threads. It was embedded in the metadata of 3 Schedule 4 contracts that had federal oversight, which meant if I disappeared, the system noticed. If I was removed improperly, certain triggers would activate, legal ones, automatic ones. But in that moment, all I felt was the sting, my face, on every screen, people I'd trained, mentored, backed up during PTO, all seeing me reduced to a footnote in a policy purge. Janine sent me a heart emoji, Craig sent a whiskey gif, nobody called again. The worst part? I kept refreshing the email, like some part of me thought they'd take it back, maybe a retraction, maybe a this was sent in error, but no. It stayed there, stamped in inboxes across the country. I didn't sleep that night, just stared at the ceiling with that horrible phrase looping through my head. Do not rehire, like I was a defective product being recalled. Not a human, not a woman who'd held their compliance floor together through 6 audits, 2 procurement failures, and an international data sharing investigation that nearly cost them their license. But none of that mattered now. HR had spoken. They thought they were done with me. They thought that email was the end. But that email, that was the ignition switch. There's a weird kind of intimacy in paperwork, especially the kind that no one wants to talk about. I never got invited to happy hours or leadership offsites, but when something went wrong, when a procurement line didn't match or a validation failed midstream, suddenly I was the only name they needed. That's how compliance works. You're invisible until you're essential. And if you're a woman in that role, double the invisibility, triple the blame. So I started archiving, not because I was paranoid, not at first, but because no one else was looking. I didn't trust memory, and I sure as hell didn't trust people. I trusted timestamps, screenshots, PDF exports, originals, copies, notarized summaries. I kept them clean, indexed, mirrored across 3 separate encrypted drives, one offline, one cloud, one buried behind dummy folders inside my personal device, disguised as wedding planning spreadsheets. My husband once joked that I was more obsessed with audit trails than romance. He wasn't wrong. It started with a routine access discrepancy in 2014. Vendor A had credentials that mapped to a non-standard route through our procurement system. The routing chain shouldn't have allowed it. I flagged it, escalated it, documented it, got silence. Then I found out vendor A's primary contact was the cousin of our procurement VP. Neat trick. I reported that too. Escalation number 2, still no action. That's when I started saving copies outside the system. Not deleting, just duplicating, just in case. By 2017, I had over 900 entries. Most small, a few enormous, including the federal compliance discrepancy that kept resurfacing like a bad penny. Every 6 months, the system would throw a validation error for one of our schedule avoid data shares. The flag said it was a formatting issue, but that was a lie. It wasn't formatting, it was falsification. Someone was overriding records to align reporting windows. I tracked the changes, I traced the access logs, I flagged it twice. Sent it to legal, CC'd risk, they thanked me for my diligence. Nothing changed, so I kept going. I built a redundant evidence tree, chain of custody maps, digital signature logs. When we renewed the federal contracts in 2020, I requested a compliance footnote be added, designating me as named custodian of validation oversight. It was boilerplate language in the reauthorization addendum. Nobody even read it, but it meant everything, because hidden deep in that clause was a dormant trigger, one that said, if custodian is terminated without procedural audit, notify agency liaison and halt payment processing until further review. They signed it. I countersigned it, legal logged it, and no one ever looked at it again, until now. After the email went out, I didn't retaliate. I didn't even respond. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my vault, verified hashes, opened my audit index, confirmed metadata. Then I scrolled to the part labeled Disclosure Contingency 9.3C. There it was, plain text, triggered by involuntary removal. Conditions met. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like gravity. 15 years of being ignored, overruled, sidelined. But I wasn't bitter, I was ready. They wanted to make an example out of me. They forgot I wrote the manual. It took less than 4 minutes. I brewed coffee with one hand while composing the email with the other. My fingers didn't shake. My heart didn't race. The adrenaline people talk about in movies, that never came. Just a quiet calm, like flipping the last page of a book I'd been reading for a decade. I didn't write anything dramatic, no bolded words, no all caps, no emotional appeals, just the facts. Subject line, Clause 9.3C, Involuntary Departure, Compliance Custodian. One sentence in the body, per contract protocol, please see attached. Then I dragged the files over. Credential logs, chain of access timestamps, revocation memo from HR, still hot off the press, and the full risk archive bundled with a validated checksum. Then I hit send. To one recipient. .gov address, no CC, no B, no fanfare, just function. And that was it. The system would do the rest. The clause had been dormant for 5 years, buried in the compliance reauth documentation nobody read. It was designed to protect against internal sabotage, what they call custodial severance risks. Basically, if the wrong person was removed without due process, the federal office wanted to know. And they didn't ask nicely. They acted. Automatically. I had been the named compliance custodian on 3 active Schedule 4 contracts. Those weren't little vendor deals, they were high-security data integrations with homeland thresholds and continuity benchmarks. When you hold that title, you're not just a note-taker, you're a legal fail-safe. You're the person whose signature stops, or starts, federal audits. You're the name that validates a system. If that name vanishes without procedural sign-off, it's not an HR issue anymore, it's a breach. Which is exactly what I'd just triggered. They didn't know that, of course. Not yet. HR thought they'd sent a power play email, a scare tactic, something to show the interns they weren't afraid to make examples. They didn't realize they just sent their entire contract validity into a gray zone. They didn't realize that by revoking my credentials without a termination audit, they had violated a federally monitored clause. They didn't even copy legal, but the federal liaison didn't need more than what I'd sent. Clause 9.3C was self-executing. Once conditions were met, once supporting documentation landed with the office, protocol dictated an automatic initiation of vendor review. That meant compliance freeze, payment hold, system integrity check, and a formal audit window opened, one that had to be resolved before anything could move forward again. They had triggered it with arrogance. I had triggered it with one email. I didn't wait for a response. There wouldn't be one. Not right away. That's not how these things work. This wasn't a courtroom or a Slack debate. This was policy. Signed, countersigned, certified, and now alive. Somewhere, an agent would be reading my name, cross-referencing credentials, pulling the vendor chain, checking timestamp discrepancies, lining up the packet I'd sent with the ones I'd logged over the last decade. Somewhere, a system alarm would go off. Not loud, not public, just a red flag blinking in a terminal in Washington. A flag that said, check this vendor, check this contract, check this termination. And someone would. Because they had to. I didn't burn anything down. I just unsealed the doors they forgot I built. The front desk girl tried to joke with him. Something about the badge printer acting up again. Ha ha, don't mind the smudge. He didn't laugh, didn't even look up, just signed his name with a government-issued pen, the kind that only moves in straight lines, and placed a leather folder flat on the counter like a chess move he'd rehearsed. His suit wasn't expensive, it was precise. Government tailoring has a kind of severity to it. No personality, just clean corners and regulation shoes. He didn't need to ask for directions. He already knew where everything was. By 9:14 a.m., reception had called upstairs. By 9:20, legal was in motion. By 9:27, the chief risk officer stopped mid-presentation in Conference 3B, mumbled something about rescheduling, and left his own meeting. By 9:32, the CEO was pulled from a quarterly call with investors and told, "There's someone you need to meet now." The air changed. You could feel it in the stairwells, doors closing faster, elevator keys clicking into override mode. People who usually wore confidence like cologne now whispering in hushed tones. No alarms, just that creeping institutional dread that sets in when someone from the outside walks in and knows more than you. By 10:05, they were all on the 15th floor. CRO, CEO, head of legal, 2 compliance officers who looked like they'd been pulled from their desks mid-email. The agent stood at the head of the table, leather folder unopened, hands calmly clasped in front of him like a man who had no interest in theatrics. Just facts. Just sequence. At 10:11, he spoke. "We've initiated a preliminary freeze pending custodial clarification." That was it. No accusation, no anger, just one line. And it was enough. The CEO blinked. Legal leaned forward, clearly hoping to ask a question, but the agent's tone had made it clear. This wasn't a conversation. This was notification. Every laptop in the room flickered. Wi-Fi throttled. Admin credentials went into sandbox mode. An invisible wall dropped between the company and its federal pipeline, and no one had the clearance to lift it. The phrase custodial clarification might as well have been a firing squad, because it meant they didn't just need someone to answer questions. They needed me, and I wasn't there. But my audit trail was. So were the contract clauses with my initials, and the federal system recognized only one name on those keys. Their faces must have been perfect. All that power in the room, rendered useless by a sentence, because it wasn't just that they'd lost access, it was that they didn't understand why. Not yet. They thought it was a mistake, a temporary hiccup, maybe an overreaction, maybe it screwed something up, maybe someone checked the wrong box, but the agent wasn't there to speculate. He was there because the system had been triggered, because someone revoked a credential tied to a federal validation layer without a closing audit, because someone fired the named custodian. And now? Every screen that used to hum with confidence went still. I imagine legal tried to say something, maybe argue that the clause didn't apply, maybe stall, maybe lie. But by then, it didn't matter. The freeze was live. The review clock had started ticking, and every click brought them closer to the part where they became the ones under investigation. I wasn't in that room, but I didn't need to be. The badge at reception had already done my talking. They tried to bluff. HR started first, clearly thinking they were still playing office politics instead of standing in the blast radius of a federal trigger. "She left early," the HR director said, with all the self-righteous squinting of someone who thought a timestamp would save her. "Twice, actually. It's in the logs. We enforce policy evenly across all levels." The agent didn't blink, didn't nod, didn't validate the sentence with a response. He just turned his eyes toward legal like he was waiting for the grown-ups to speak. Legal fumbled. Pages shuffled. A binder thudded open. Someone tried to speak and cleared their throat instead. Finally, a senior counsel, Richard, probably, judging by the whimper of authority in his voice, said, As we understand it, her custodial role was limited to minor systems, nothing essential. Her termination falls well within internal policy bounds. No, the agent replied, crisp as ice. Her name is on the primary validation layer for all Schedule 4 compliance tools. Silence, not dramatic silence, dead silence. Like a vacuum had entered the room and sucked out every molecule of confidence. He let that hang for a moment, then continued. Under the reauthorization framework signed in 20 subsection 9.3c, her termination without audit constitutes a procedural breach. That breach automatically initiates a full vendor compliance review under federal oversight. The translation hit the room like a pipe bomb. You can't process payments. You can't submit reports. You can't do business with any Schedule IV partner until this is resolved. The CEO's jaw tensed. Someone from finance muttered something under their breath about procurement backlog. Legal looked like they wanted to melt into their ergonomic chairs. The CRO reached for his tablet, only to find the network connection already dead. System lockdowns had begun. HR still didn't get it. She tried again, voice rising like volume might rescue authority. But she left early. We had to take action. She held a critical designation, the agent repeated flatly. And you removed her without audit. He didn't need to say more. It was written into every clause they'd signed, every footnote they'd ignored, every internal memo they skimmed because it came from compliance and not strategy. They'd treated me like a formality, like a process that could be replaced with an app or an intern. But I wasn't a formality. I was the fail-safe. And now the fail-safe had gone off. What none of them understood until that moment was that their entire federal standing had been balanced on my presence. Not because I demanded it, not because I asked for power, but because I'd been the one quietly keeping the integrity stack intact while they chased performance bonuses and quarterly optics. Every signature I'd logged, every flagged risk I archived, every workaround I refused to approve. It had all built a reputation that lived not in the office politics, but in the system. And now the system was responding. They didn't just fire an employee, they voided their own compliance. The foundation wasn't cracking. It was already gone. By Monday morning, no one was pretending anymore. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. Reception usually hummed with the sound of small talk and fake laughter, but now the only sound was the security gate grinding open for no one. Upstairs, doors that were always propped open for transparency culture had been shut tight. Blinds drawn. Legal had commandeered 3 conference rooms and locked the printers. Even the espresso machine was dark, like the building itself knew something had gone wrong. External counsel had been called over the weekend. Not the usual firm, someone higher tier. Government contracts and crisis management. Their name had shown up on the login tracker before sunrise, pulling logs from the compliance archives, opening incident reports that hadn't seen the light of day since 2018. Every flagged escalation I'd ever submitted was now being reopened by strangers who didn't know my face, but knew my ID. The company's federal contracts, audit lock, procurement pipeline, dead in the water, payment systems, frozen pending review, and the worst part, at least for them, was that there was no one left inside who could explain the architecture. Because that was me. That had always been me. At 9:37 a.m., the board convened. It was supposed to be a quarterly prep call. Instead, it turned into an emergency inquiry led by the chairman himself, who had clearly been blindsided by the term custodial breach showing up in an email from Federal Liaison Counsel. The CEO looked like a man trying to paddle upstream in a sinking canoe. He said words like miscommunication and administrative policy and internal restructuring. None of them meant anything, not anymore. What mattered were the documents. And those all had my name. Not in the bylines, not in the footers, but in the metadata, buried in the logs, attached to every escalation, every unresolved risk, every unanswered audit recommendation that had been quietly marked low priority by someone hoping to fast-track vendor onboarding. I wasn't on the call, but my fingerprints were everywhere. There was a file, dated 18 months ago, where I warned about inconsistent timeframes between vendor reports and system validation clocks. I escalated it twice. No one followed up. That file was now being cited in a federal review note as early indication of non-compliant data framing. Another report, red flagged during the last internal audit, had been dismissed by procurement with the note low probability of review risk, and I had written in the margin, not low probability, low visibility. This will trigger if mishandled. It had now been mishandled. Badly. The chairman paused mid-call and asked a single question. One sentence, 5 words. Cold and surgical. Who signed the HR release? Silence. Not the theatrical kind. Not the boardroom tension where someone coughs and shifts blame with a well-rehearsed sigh. No. This was dead, awful silence. The kind that happens when everyone in the room suddenly realizes they don't know. Or worse, that the person who signed it had no idea what they'd actually done. Because it wasn't just about me, it was about what my departure meant, what it triggered, what it undermined. The HR release had been signed like a vending machine form. Checked off, scanned, filed, probably by someone who thought they were streamlining headcount and flexing authority. They didn't know the signature was a lever tied to a detonator. And now the board was sitting in the crater, no shouting, no legal fireworks, just an entire executive structure staring into the abyss of their own negligence, piece by piece, clause by clause. I hadn't made a single call, but everything I ever documented was now standing in that room, louder than any accusation. It came in a heavy white envelope, hand-delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet my eyes. No return address, but the embossed letterhead on the flap told me everything I needed to know. Corporate legal. The same office that hadn't returned a single one of my flagged reports in over 2 years. The same desk that once told me compliance is advisory, not mandatory. Now they wanted to talk. I didn't open it right away. I poured coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, let the envelope sit there, watching me, like a dog waiting to be let in after tearing up the garden. When I finally slid it open with a kitchen knife, the blade slid through like butter. No resistance. The folder inside was thick, but not chaotic. Neatly prepared, carefully worded. They'd had a week to figure out their tone. First page, formal apology, no names, just, on behalf of the executive leadership team, we regret the recent events surrounding your departure and the impact of internal miscommunication. Not firing, not retaliation, just events. Language polished so smooth it couldn't hold weight. Second page, retroactive reinstatement. They had backdated it. Claimed I'd been reinstated as of the following morning after my so-called termination, effectively trying to pretend it never happened. As if a system email seen by hundreds of employees and vendors could just be memory hold. As if do not rehire could be walked back with an administrative shrug. Third page, the settlement. Cash. A respectable amount. Not insulting, but nowhere near what it should have been. Attached to it, a standard NDA clause. Broad, total. If signed, I'd be waiving any claims, any disclosures, and essentially validating the fiction that this was all a misunderstanding, resolved amicably between grown-ups. I smiled, just a little, because it meant they finally understood what they'd done, but not well enough. I scanned the whole packet, uploaded it into the archive, indexed it under post-termination response, attempted retroactive compliance. Then I composed a new email. Same recipient as before, my liaison at the Federal Procurement Office. Subject, Clause 9.3c, follow-up. Body, please see attached documents provided by the vendor following termination. Per protocol, attempted retroactive compliance does not negate procedural violation. Custodial audit conditions remain unmet. No rage, no threat, just the truth in their language. I hit send. No reply was necessary. The system already had the clause. The documents, the sequence, the metadata. What I'd sent was just reinforcement, fuel for the timeline already unfolding without me, and I didn't need to lift a finger beyond that. They had pulled the wrong thread and thought they could stitch it back together with hush money and high-priced semantics. But the unraveling had already begun, and now the federal office had even more evidence, not of error but of intent. They tried to buy silence, but I didn't need revenge. I had documentation, and documentation always speaks. It started like a whisper in the halls. HR lead on personal leave. Legal, stepping back to prioritize family. The CEO, absent from the usual investor roundtables. Then came the formal announcements. Carefully worded, PR tested, wrapped in phrases like transition of leadership and realignment of strategic priorities. Inside the company, it was chaos behind closed doors. But on the surface, smooth as glass, as if executives resigning in sequence was part of some serene 5-year plan. The shareholders weren't buying it. Neither were the vendors who'd stopped getting paid on time. And certainly not the federal agencies now crawling through every clause like termites in the foundation. The HR lead went first. Her statement read like it had been drafted at gunpoint by someone in a silk blouse. I'm grateful for the opportunities and proud of the team we built. She didn't mention me. Of course she didn't. But I was the reason she was gone. Not because I demanded it, not because I fought for revenge, but because the system removed her, like a contaminated node. No noise, just deletion. Chief Legal followed a week later. After many years of dedicated service, I've decided it's time to pursue new challenges. No press interview, no successor named, no final round of applause. He left quietly, possibly advised to stay very quiet. And then the CEO. The press release said, for health reasons. But that was just a last-ditch effort to salvage legacy. Everyone knew the truth. You don't step down from an 8-figure seat unless the walls are burning or the feds are counting bricks. In this case, both. Meanwhile, I didn't say a word. I didn't go back. Didn't ask for a seat at the table. I'd already built the table. They were the ones who tried to light it on fire, and then sat there coughing when the smoke triggered every alarm I'd hardwired into the floorboards. My vindication came in a single email from the Federal Procurement Office. Subject: Custodial Review, Final Determination. Body: Upon completion of the vendor audit and clause compliance review, custodial authority has been restored and validated under Section 9.3c. No fault attributed to custodian. Status: cleared. I read it twice. Then I downloaded the attached PDF. 3 pages, agency seal, timestamp, my name, restored. I posted it on LinkedIn. No headline, no hashtags, no commentary, just the PDF. The engagement was instructive. People read it, people understood it, former colleagues liked it, vendors commented things like, and integrity wins. The silence from my former executives? Deafening. But that silence was the statement. They couldn't dispute it, couldn't spin it, because the one thing more powerful than spin is a federal seal of validation. Cold, unflinching, and absolute. So I let the document speak. I never asked for recognition, but I made sure the truth had a place to live. And this time, no one could delete it. It came in late, past business hours on a Thursday. No subject line, just a plain text email, the kind that slips past filters and formality. From a name I didn't recognize at first, Elena Cho, Associate General Counsel. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another vague recruiter pitch or networking spam. But something about the phrasing in the preview stopped me. We've been rebuilding... I opened it. She got straight to the point. I know we've never met, she wrote. I joined after the review concluded. What I walked into was wreckage, the kind you don't clean up. You document it, and you build something stronger in its place. She said she'd spent the last 3 months unpacking the internal audit chain, that my archive had become their unofficial training manual, not by decree, just by necessity. It was the only thing left that made sense. Dates lined up. Access trails were clear. Risk reports were templated like policy documents. Clean, structured, methodical. Compliance didn't fail, she wrote. It was ignored, buried under politics and performance theater. Then one line stuck with me. Your silence was louder than any headline. I stared at it for a long time, not because it was flattering, but because it was true. I never shouted, never sued, never stood in front of a podium with a bitter speech and a flashing camera. I didn't go viral. I didn't post a manifesto. I didn't even send a warning. I just documented. That had always been enough, even when it felt like it wasn't. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I saved her message, tucked it into the same encrypted folder where I'd kept the backups, the reports, the clause triggers. And right next to it, I kept one other file, the image HR had used in that company-wide email, my badge photo, the one they'd blasted across every inbox, captioned, "Do not rehire," the one they thought would erase me, reduce me to an object lesson, a warning to others. They used my photo to end me, but I used their system to expose them, quietly, irrevocably.